We'll take your excellent daughter in marriage, but we'll cut ties with her useless mother.
At the wedding of my daughter, Grace, after Violet, the groom's mother, finished her speech, the groom's relatives erupted in applause. During the face-to-face meeting between our families, when I told Violet that I was not currently working a regular job, she started ignoring me. She is the vice president of the company inherited from her father, so she probably dislikes me for not having a job. I had to quit my job because of my illness, but since then, I've been working part-time to support my daughter's tuition and living expenses. Grace even mentioned this in her speech, but Violet dismissed it as a made-up story to protect me. The only relatives of Grace attending the wedding were myself, while the groom's side had the overwhelming majority. Additionally, Violet is a business executive, and socially, she seems to be in a higher position than I am. I have no way to turn this situation around. Seeing Grace's anxious face looking at me, I decided to leave the venue. If stepping back will smooth things over, then that's fine. If Grace and her husband, Owen, can be happy, that's all that matters. I told myself this and left the venue. Honestly, I wanted to stay and take in every moment of my daughter's wedding, this special occasion. My heart was filled with frustration, and tears started to well up. At that same time, someone arrived at the venue. I wonder if it's turning into a beautiful ceremony. I am Chloe, 50 years old. I worked until I was 40, but had to retire due to my illness. My husband died in an accident when Grace was small, and both my parents and my in-laws passed away from illness, so I had no one to rely on. But driven by the desire to send Grace to university, I worked multiple part-time jobs and borrowed money from my friends to scrape together the tuition fees. Seeing my efforts, Grace also worked hard at her studies and was able to enter a state university as a scholarship student. After graduation, she joined her dream company, a major publishing house, and began living on her own. My illness is called adult asthma, which is said to be harder to fully cure than childhood asthma. However, since both childhood and adult asthma are caused by inflammation in the airways, by removing as many triggers as possible, I can reduce the frequency of attacks. Once I sent my daughter off into society, I was able to finally have some personal time, and though I felt lonely, the emotional and physical burden on me decreased. Thanks to this, my asthma attacks have become less frequent over time. In the past, I avoided going out because once I had an attack, the coughing would not stop. However, now I enjoy my time visiting resort areas, attending reunions, and doing other things I love. One day, I received a call from Grace after a long time. After chatting about her recent work and my hobbies, Grace paused and then said something surprising.
Actually, I'm getting married to Owen.
I had heard that Grace and Owen, who work in the same fashion magazine editorial department, had been dating since their first year at the company. But I never expected they'd already reached the point of marriage, and it made me realize just how quickly time passes. The purpose of the call was to announce their engagement and invite me to a meeting between our families. Congratulations. I think you've told me this before, but what do you like about Owen? Caught off guard by my sudden question, Grace answered, her voice sounding shy even over the phone.
Owen is really great at his job, but he's also so humble and respectful towards us juniors. He's someone I really look up to.
Some people may act like gentlemen at work, but have a completely different attitude in private, so it was a relief to hear that Owen was consistent in both settings. By the way, Grace mentioned that the date for the family meeting will be decided based on both families' schedules, but the location has already been chosen after they did some research together. Also, they plan to split the cost of the meal themselves, and I was impressed by how responsible the couple seemed. The only thing left for me to do before the day is to learn a little about the groom's side of the family. But before I could bring this up, Grace mentioned it herself.
Before the meeting, I'd like to introduce him to Mom. Is that okay?
I had planned to ask about her parents then as well, and I replied, of course. 2 weeks had passed since the phone call, and Grace finally brought Owen over to our house. Owen was dressed casually, but with an elegant shirt, and his neatly styled hair left a good impression. After a brief introduction, Owen started talking about Grace.
Grace is full of ideas. She comes up with such interesting projects that even I, her senior, feel a little bit rushed.
Owen continued to talk enthusiastically about Grace's accomplishments at work, not even stopping when she tried to interrupt. There were many things he mentioned that Grace would normally keep to herself, and hearing them made me feel proud, almost as if it were happening to me. Then he shifted to talking about their private life.
What I really respect about her is her honesty. I'm kind of stubborn, but she is.
As he spoke, his happiness was so apparent that it made me feel warm inside too. When he finished, Grace finally spoke up.
I've already told Mom about the things I respect about Owen, so I won't say it again here.
Owen, pressing for more, asked, "What did you say?" "Tell me," but Grace pouted and said, "I won't tell you." Watching them so happily teasing each other made my heart swell with emotion. Grace had worked so hard, entering university as a scholarship student, landing her dream job at a major publishing company, and now finding such a wonderful partner. All of this was thanks to her dedication and perseverance. Before I knew it, tears were falling down my face, and Owen quickly offered me a tissue.
Chloe, are you okay?
As I received the tissue, I couldn't help but notice how Owen's quick actions reflected his kindness. Afterward, Owen hesitantly began talking about his parents.
My parents run a company inherited from my maternal grandfather. It's mainly a business selling imported furniture, and recently they've started doing online shopping as well.
As I listened to him, the uniqueness of their business and the fact that it's a husband and wife operation made me try to guess the name of the company. Owen's face lit up in surprise.
Wow, Chloe, you're really well informed.
Well informed, there are probably very few people who don't know about a company that generates an annual revenue of $10 million with a husband and wife business. Your parents were not only passionate about business, but also about your education. It's no wonder you turned out to be such a wonderful person. Despite growing up in such a wealthy family, Owen didn't show a hint of arrogance. I was once again touched by how lucky my daughter was to have found such a great partner.
Not at all. And even though it's a family business, it's more like my mother takes the lead.
For just a moment, there was a shadow on his bright smile. I felt a bit uneasy, but I also realized that it would be rude to pry into delicate family matters during a first meeting. Our conversation continued to flow smoothly, and we enjoyed a fun time from the morning until just past lunchtime. When it was time to leave, I asked Owen if he was planning to take Grace to meet his parents soon. He told me that his parents were busy, so their schedules hadn't lined up yet. As I waved them off, I found myself getting nervous, wondering what we would talk about during the family meeting. A month after they came to our house, The long-awaited day of the family meeting finally arrived. The venue was a long-established, old-fashioned restaurant. When I opened the door and entered, there was a large chandelier at the entrance, and the luxurious atmosphere almost made me feel overwhelmed. Guided by the waiter, we walked deeper into the restaurant, where Owen and Grace were already waiting at their seats. Grace looked cheerful, but Owen seemed a little nervous, his expression stiff. I wondered why that was, and just as I was thinking this, the other party's parents also took their seats. Owen's father was wearing a plain gray suit, while his mother was quite flashy. Her dress, embroidered with large black swallowtail butterflies on the chest and back, had lace sewn into the hem. Her nails were also very elaborate, matching the dress with black and sparkly glitter. In addition, her makeup was very heavy, with foundation so thick that her natural skin tone was unrecognizable, and bright red lipstick that stood out prominently. She stared at me from head to toe before offering a tight smile.
Nice to meet you. I'm Violet, Owen's mother. I'm glad we could meet.
Then she leaned in as if to whisper and added softly,
Chloe, I can tell just by looking at you how much you've been through.
Looking back, I think she was trying to say that my appearance seemed shabby. At the time, though, my mind wasn't working well due to nervousness. After that, Owen's father, Shawn, also greeted us, but his voice was so quiet and lacking in confidence that it was hard to make out what he was saying. By the time we had finished our introductions, Violet leaned forward slightly and asked me a question.
So, Chloe, what do you do for a living?
Her way of asking was blunt and almost interrogative. Right now, I'm not working. I had to quit the job I did until my 40s due to my illness. After hearing that, she refused to make eye contact with me. It felt as though my words, which I had answered just for her, were hanging in the air, and I was overwhelmed with an immense sense of discomfort. Shawn, looking a little uneasy, was gazing downward, while Owen's face was bright red with anger.
You asked her the question, why did you become silent?
But she continued to stare out the window, as if she hadn't heard him at all, putting on a deliberately aloof expression. Seeing her like that, Grace also seemed like she wanted to say something, but held back, biting her lip. The French cuisine served was elegant in appearance and had a refined taste. Everyone was savoring it and saying how delicious it was, but Violet was the only one who ate with a bored expression. Owen sighed when he saw her acting this way and apologized to me on her behalf.
I'm sorry for my mother's rude behavior. She lives for her work and sometimes tends to impose her values on others.
As the conversation went on, I learned that it was the seemingly timid Shawn who was the president, while the strong-willed Violet was the vice president. Since Violet was the one often featured in the media, I had mistakenly assumed she was the president, which was a surprise to me. However, even though the conversation was about her, Violet continued to ignore us. Shawn, desperately trying to calm her down, started talking about her achievements.
People often say we run a family business, but I can't do anything without my wife. When we started online shopping, it was mostly Violet who built the website.
As he spoke, he was nervously glancing at Violet with one eye, his cold sweat showing. He seemed more like a servant serving a princess than a husband. Despite his efforts, Violet continued to ignore us throughout the entire meeting. After parting ways with Owen and his parents, Grace, perhaps out of concern for me, said she would stop by my house. As I was sipping the coffee that Grace had made for me, lost in thought for a moment, she hesitantly started speaking.
I'm proud of my mom who raised me while fighting your illness. So don't worry about what others think.
Seeing her smile shyly, my heart, which had been a little prickly, warmed up. If my daughter is on my side, that's enough. Besides, this isn't some political marriage, and chances are I won't have many interactions with that princess. I thanked my daughter and tried to organize my thoughts. Before I knew it, time had passed, and the wedding day arrived. When Grace was little, she had seen a picture of me in my wedding dress in an album, and she loved the design, saying she wanted to wear one just like it. However, that was nearly 20 years ago, and I thought she must have forgotten about it. But when she came out of the changing room after getting dressed, she was wearing a dress that looked almost identical to mine, with small ribbons all around the hem. I'm sure I would have cried no matter what dress she wore, but the unexpected surprise made me burst into tears. You look beautiful. Truly, you've grown up. As she handed me a tissue, Grace laughed and said, "You're exaggerating."
Thank you, Mom, for everything. From now on, I'll do my best. Let's make lots of happy memories for all the hard work you've put in so far.
Hearing those words made me cry even more. Sure, I've struggled until now, but even those hardships are irreplaceable memories for me. After me, Owen and his parents also arrived at the bride's preparation room. Owen was also deeply moved seeing my daughter in her wedding dress.
Grace, you look truly beautiful. I can't stand next to you.
He joked, but he looked great in his slim-fitting white tuxedo. His silver bow tie and vest added a stylish accent. On the other hand, right next to him, Violet was wearing a flashy dress that I thought rivaled Grace's.
Grace, you look absolutely stunning.
Then, in a voice only I could hear, she added,
Just like her mother, you're so beautiful.
She flashed a sarcastic smile toward me. Once again, I felt a prick in my heart, but I decided to focus on the ceremony and switch gears. The ceremony went smoothly, and we moved to the reception. Since I was the only one from the bride's side, I sat alone at the round table on the right side from the entrance. Looking across at the groom's side, I saw Shawn and Violet sitting at the family table and many relatives occupying the guest seats. The situation already felt like I was on the outside, but that wasn't all. They glanced at me and whispered to each other. My heart was uneasy, but since I had no idea what they were talking about, I made an effort to remain composed. During the first part of the reception, I was moved to tears by my daughter's speech. Grace said, there were times when my motivation to study dropped, but seeing my mom work hard at both her job and taking care of the house made me want to do my best too. That was my line. In response to her speech, I shared my feelings toward her during my speech as the family representative in the second part. During Grace's exam period, we had to spend a lot on mock exams and preparations for her entrance into university, so I took on more part-time jobs than usual. From customer service to cleaning and office work, I did many different kinds of jobs, and some of them weren't the right fit for me. With the constant pressure of needing to earn, when I made a big mistake at work, the stress triggered my asthma, and it worsened to the worst possible state. Seeing me like that, Grace prioritized taking care of me over her studies. When I told her that I wanted her to focus on her studies during such an important time, she replied seriously, "There's nothing more important than your health, Mom." Her kind words and actions have saved me countless times. That's why I've always wished for Grace to be happy as soon as possible. I can't believe it's actually happening now. It feels like a dream. In response to my words, both Grace and Owen smiled through their tears. However, Owen's relatives had cold expressions, and some even looked at me with disdain. What on earth had I done? It seemed that both Grace and Owen noticed the tension as they looked toward them with suspicion. As I sat back down, being sent off with sparse applause, the groom's representative stood up. Of course, it was Violet. She was wearing a dress very similar to the indigo-colored one Grace had worn for her outfit change, but the bold open-back design seemed inappropriate for her age, and I found myself feeling embarrassed just watching her. She, on the other hand, stood with great poise, holding the microphone with an air of self-importance.
That speech earlier was just lovely, wasn't it? Almost like a made-up story.
At her words, Owen's relatives erupted into laughter, as if they were watching a comedy show. Meanwhile, Grace, Owen, and Shawn turned pale.
Just look at how healthy Chloe is. There's no way she was ever sick.
At that moment, Grace stood up, ready to protest. But when Violet snapped her fingers, a staff member nearby forced Grace back into her seat. It seemed that not only had Violet swayed her relatives, but even some of the staff were under her influence. From then on, Violet avoided sharing any memories about Owen and instead focused entirely on slandering me. According to her, I supposedly faked adult asthma as an excuse to quit a job I didn't like. She claimed that afterward, I avoided working altogether, made my daughter take on multiple part-time jobs, and disrupted her exam preparations. As if that wasn't enough, she even fabricated a story about me demanding large sums of money from Grace after she started working. Though every word out of Violet's mouth was a complete lie, her impressive storytelling made it all sound disturbingly believable.
And now I hear she's trying to leech off my son too. Then, the one who's truly going to be happy isn't Grace or Owen. It's Chloe, isn't it?
As Violet said this, Owen, unable to bear it any longer, stood up, brushing past the staff who tried to stop him, and walked over to Violet's side.
Who's the one making up stories here? You've heard from both Chloe herself and Grace that she's been battling an illness, haven't you?
Violet looked at Owen with an expression of disappointment.
Everyone, take a look. My own son, Owen, has already been taken in by her. Isn't she such a shameless woman?
At this, the laughter from Owen's relatives grew even louder than before. While the sound of many voices can sometimes give strength, in this moment it felt like it was draining all the energy out of me.
We'll gladly welcome the exceptional Grace into our family, but I think it's time to sever ties with someone as useless as you. For the happiness of the bride and groom, it's the obvious choice, isn't it?
Violet added with a wink, and Owen's relatives stood up, giving a thunderous round of applause. First of all, there are far more relatives on their side, and Violet's social standing is much higher than mine. It also seems like she had already fabricated and spread rumors about me even before making the speech. There's no way to turn the situation around, and even if I did, it might only cause trouble for Grace. If stepping back would keep things peaceful, then that's fine by me. I tried to avoid being seen as much as possible and quietly left the venue. As I walked away, I could hear mocking laughter behind me, as if they were jeering at a defeated loser. Mixed in with that, I also heard Owen yelling angrily at Violet. Once I was out of the venue, I started running. I thought that if I lingered, Grace or Owen might come after me. It had been a long time since I last ran, and the stress combined with the physical exertion brought on my asthma symptoms again. The more I tried to steady my breathing, the more ragged it became. I hurriedly descended a nearby staircase, gripping the handrail and coughing, when I saw Grace running toward me, her hair disheveled and her dress held up to keep from tripping. Her face was a mix of anger and tears, a complex expression.
Mom, wait.
She caught up to me and gently rubbed my back.
I didn't bring you here to make you feel sad. I'm so sorry.
From what she told me, neither Grace, Owen, nor even Shawn had been informed about the contents of Violet's speech. After my exit, Violet grew more emboldened, trying to spread more outrageous lies to the relatives, saying I was squandering Grace's earnings on a lavish lifestyle, or that I hadn't remarried because I was fooling around with different men. Apparently, when Grace, Owen, and some of the staff tried to come after me, they had to stay back to stop Violet, who was causing a scene.
I can't forgive anyone who mocks you and doesn't understand all the hardships you've been through. Let's go home.
Grace was ready to leave with me, but I quickly stopped her. This is your special day. You're the star here, so you should stay. Everything will be fine if I just leave. Hearing that, Grace flew into a rage.
Why would you say something like that? I am who I am today because of you. I don't want to be part of a family that disrespects you.
Then, the two of us headed toward the entrance. I had never seen Grace this angry before, and I was so shocked that I couldn't even respond. But knowing that she was angry on my behalf brought tears of joy to my eyes.
Chloe.
As Grace and I walked down the hallway, I heard a familiar voice call my name. Turning around, I saw a man in a wheelchair smiling warmly at me. In my previous job, I had worked as a housekeeper. The man who called out to me was Michael, my last client before I retired. He had been the president of a certain company, but had passed the business on to a successor after being involved in an accident during a work-related outing, which led him to live a life of recuperation. He was a very friendly person who treated me not as a housekeeper, but as an equal and a friend. However, he rarely spoke about the nature of his business. From his unpretentious demeanor, I could tell he avoided discussing work because he didn't want to create distance between us. Still, from the guests who occasionally visited his villa and the quality of his beloved furnishings, it was clear that he had been very successful in business. When I retired, he warmly sent me off, saying, "Even though you won't be a housekeeper anymore, I hope we can remain friends." Even now, we email each other regularly and keep each other updated on our lives. Still, meeting him for the first time in 10 years at a wedding venue was a complete surprise. What's more, the venue was reserved exclusively for the bride and groom's families and relatives. There were no other couples getting married here today. This arrangement came about because Violet wanted to celebrate the wedding extravagantly without worrying about others. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that it was all orchestrated to ridicule me the way she had. So, why was he here? While I was lost in thought, he noticed Grace standing next to me and looked between the two of us in astonishment.
My goodness. The bride marrying my grandson is Chloe's daughter.
As Grace and I stood there bewildered, he reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like a postcard. It was the wedding invitation. Although it was his first time meeting Grace, he must have recognized her from the photo of the bride and groom on the invitation.
My apologies for the late introduction. I'm Chloe's friend and Owen's grandfather.
Grace and I could only exchange bewildered glances. Come to think of it, we had heard that Owen's grandfather wasn't feeling well and would join the ceremony later. But for that grandfather to be Michael, my former client and friend, what a surprise. Grace quickly regained her composure, adjusted her dress and hair, and turned to face him.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Grace, Chloe's daughter. My mother has always spoken of you as someone she deeply respects.
He burst into tears seeing Grace in her dress.
It's almost too much. How lucky my grandson is to marry such a beautiful and wonderful woman.
For a moment, he appeared deeply moved, but then he seemed to realize the unusual nature of the situation.
But why is the bride, the star of the day, here?
Grace, unsure of where to start, hesitated. So I stepped in to explain everything that had led up to this moment. Violet disliked me for not having a steady job and had spread unflattering rumors about me to the family beforehand. She had even gone as far as to badmouth me in her speech at the wedding reception, saying that we should cut ties. When he understood the situation, he became so furious that it seemed like his head might burst into flames.
You quit your job to receive treatment for your illness, and after that, you worked multiple jobs for the sake of your child. I'm so sorry for my daughter's rude behavior. I will speak to her harshly and make sure she understands.
Afterward, he immediately urged us to head back to the reception, and we all took the elevator together to the venue. He was very familiar with handling the wheelchair, and as soon as the elevator doors opened, he propelled himself toward the reception doors with incredible speed. The moment I opened the door, he shouted Violet's name loudly and entered. Inside, Violet was loudly criticizing me while greedily devouring the unfinished steak and cake that had been left at my seat. At this point, it seemed that some of the relatives finally realized her abnormal behavior. Together with Owen and the staff, they were trying to stop her.
I've heard the whole story.
Violet flinched at her father's fury, sweating nervously as she approached us.
Dad, please don't get so angry. She's the one pretending to be sick and trying to get money from her daughter, Grace, the wicked woman.
Violet started to make excuses, trying to calm her father's anger. If I hadn't been acquainted with him, her words might have worked, but in this case, they only backfired. He glared at her even more sharply than before.
Who's the wicked one?
With that, he moved to the stand microphone and adjusted it to his height with Owen's help. After confirming that I was the only one from the bride's side of the family, he briefly introduced himself and offered his congratulations on the marriage. Then he took a deep breath and got to the main point.
Actually, Chloe is an old friend of mine. So, I understand her situation and her character much better than I do my own daughter.
As he said this, Owen's family began to murmur among themselves. But when Michael cleared his throat lightly, the room fell silent. Once the room had quieted down, he began explaining to clear up the misunderstandings about me. He talked about how Grace's father had passed away in an accident when she was young, how I worked as a housekeeper in his home, and how our relationship had been more like that of friends than a typical employer-employee one. He even mentioned that we continued to stay in touch. After a brief pause, he continued,
She quit her job because she got asthma. After hearing all the stories of her dedication to work, do you really believe that she would quit just to avoid work and start depending on her daughter?
At his question, the people around him nodded in agreement, looking convinced. Violet, watching them, gritted her teeth in frustration. Michael glanced at her and then continued.
Even after quitting her job, she kept working part-time and raising Grace all on her own.
When Michael turned to me and applauded, the relatives of Owen followed suit. I am sorry for the misunderstanding. You've really had a hard time. I heard words of sympathy from the crowd. I was relieved that the misunderstanding had been cleared up, but what surprised me even more was the sudden change in their attitudes. Michael is someone who can make such a strong impact just by speaking, without showing any evidence like photos or documents. As was clear from his earlier speech as the representative of the family, even Violet could feel his charisma as a businessman. However, Michael is not just charismatic in business. He also possesses high moral character, which is probably why the family members tend to believe what he says. Violet, terrified of losing her place, turns to Shawn for help.
You're on my side, right? Say something back.
Seeing Violet clinging to him like a child, Shawn looked slightly troubled. However, with a decisive look, he shook off her hand.
I admire Michael, both as a businessman and as a person. That's why I trust him and his friend Chloe.
With a trembling voice, he said this and then looked directly at me, apologizing. Michael seemed a bit flustered by Shawn's words, but soon he returned to his serious demeanor. He raised his voice into the microphone, louder than before.
Anyone who hurts my dear friend and doesn't even offer an apology is no family of mine. Therefore, I hereby disown you.
With a commanding declaration, he snapped his fingers. At his signal, several strong staff members entered the room, picked up the stunned Violet, and carried her out. Then, other staff members came in to rearrange the seating so that I and Owen's family could enjoy the food together in a circular arrangement. Michael had mentioned before heading into the venue that he had a quick matter to attend to and had stopped by the reception desk. Apparently, in that brief time, he had managed to explain the situation to the staff, which was truly astonishing. Thanks to him, the reception was restarted, and I enjoyed one of the happiest moments of my life. A week after the wedding, I had an unexpected visitor. Around lunchtime, as I returned home from a shopping trip, I found Violet standing in front of my house. That day, the weather was beautiful, and I had walked to the store. Violet seemed to have noticed the car in the driveway and assumed I was pretending not to be home. Tilting her head, she rang the doorbell several times. I panicked, worried it would disturb the neighbors, and hurried to the front door. When she noticed me, she snorted and glared at me with disdain.
Well, welcome back. Been out playing with my dad, have you?
I tilted my head, confused by her comment. I explained that I had just returned from grocery shopping, but she dismissed it as if it was irrelevant. Then, she blocked my path as I tried to enter the house.
You embarrassed me the other day, so I'm here to get my revenge.
She declared, pointing a finger at me and yelling loudly enough to disturb the neighbors.
Are you kidding me? Not only my son, but you've managed to manipulate my father too?
Apparently, she still didn't believe that Michael and I were old friends. Instead, she was convinced that I had somehow charmed him into siding with me on the day of the wedding. But honestly, whether it was true or not didn't seem to matter to her. She just wanted to find a way to take me down. It was midday on a weekend, so there were a fair number of people passing by. Even though her accusations were completely baseless, it didn't make the situation any less unpleasant. I tried to get her to leave, but she stayed rooted to the spot as if she had grown into the ground. At that moment, her yelling was interrupted by a booming voice.
Enough already.
The voice belonged to none other than Shawn. Apparently, Violet doesn't have a driver's license and always relies on Shawn to drive her around. Today, Violet had begged Shawn to bring her to my house, claiming she wanted to apologize sincerely for her behavior. Believing her words, he had agreed to bring her. My house faces a major road, so it's difficult to park in front of it for an extended period. Additionally, there's no coin-operated parking lot nearby. So Violet suggested, "Why don't you wait at the nearby cafe and enjoy some tea?" Incidentally, the cafe she mentioned is just a short walk from my house. She had even added, "I'll also buy some baked goods there to bring as a gift for Chloe," to reassure him. Trusting her intentions, Shawn had agreed and cheerfully waved her off as she headed out with the bag of baked goods in hand. When the cafe latte he ordered was ready, he moved to a terrace seat to pass the time. However, he had been thinking it was strange that she, who had been angry instead of remorseful until now, suddenly changed her attitude. Hoping it was just unnecessary worry, he paid the bill early and discreetly went to check on her. That's when he heard her scream and rushed over in a panic. Violet was stunned by Shawn's angry demeanor, her mouth opening and closing silently. Shawn grabbed her arm firmly and pulled her away from me. Then he apologized to me courteously.
I'm so sorry for causing you trouble again. Thanks to you, I found my courage. If I don't step up, I won't be able to protect what I want to, both as a business owner and as a family member.
Shawn then explained the whole story to me. Although he was the president, he had been treated like Violet's puppet, with his role limited to signing documents for critical decisions such as personnel matters and management policies. She left the mundane tasks to him and took on only flashy responsibilities like handling media interviews and attending dinners with important figures, acting as if she were the face of the company. It was also discovered, thanks to the accounting department noticing altered receipts, that she had pretended to attend business dinners but had actually been out partying at clubs. When all this was exposed, Violet turned bright red with a mix of embarrassment and anger and lashed out. Shawn watched her reaction and let out a quiet sigh.
I've admired your charisma ever since we first met. But after the company started performing well and gaining attention, you began wielding power recklessly and doing whatever you please. I can't take it anymore.
With that, he thrust a termination notice and divorce papers in front of her. Despite her resistance, he forced a pen into her hand and made her sign the divorce papers. After taking the signed documents, he instructed her to wait at the cafe. Violet, muttering crude insults at me, reluctantly retraced her steps back to the cafe. Shawn apologized to me for Violet's behavior and his own lack of strength.
Since she was both my partner at work and at home, losing control at work also meant losing my place at home.
At the wedding reception, after hearing about how I raised Grace while battling my illness, he said it gave him the courage to pull himself together. Watching him leave with a refreshed expression, I too felt ready to take a step forward. A few months later, I received a letter from Michael. In it, he apologized for Violet's rude behavior at the wedding and shared an update about her. She had been disowned by her family and fired from her job. Additionally, at Shawn and Michael's suggestion, I filed a claim for compensation against her, which left her with nothing. She lost everything. Since she left, Shawn's company has been thriving even more, and the employees all seem vibrant and motivated. The letter concluded with a note asking for my continued support. The truth is, my asthma symptoms have significantly improved, so I decided to return to work for Michael as a housekeeper. Although I wanted to work again, I hesitated because of my new position as a relative, but he actually encouraged me to come back. Thanks to his support, I was able to resume my job. In the past, most of my income went toward Grace's tuition and living expenses, but now I can even indulge in hobbies like traveling, and I'm enjoying a fulfilling life. Recently, Grace shared the happy news of her pregnancy, and Owen has been actively participating by attending parenting classes with her, which is a relief to hear. As for Violet, who was disowned and divorced, I wonder if she'll ever meet her grandchild. Thinking about that leaves me with mixed feelings. Still, for my daughter, who told me she wants to create happy memories together, I decided to focus on the future and headed off to work with a renewed mindset.